Welcome, fellow horror hounds, and welcome to the latest episode of Talk and Stalk, your unholy home for horror. I'm your host, as always, Barry, and today's podcast is really just going to be me talking about and ranking the Nightmare on Elm Street films. Now, I'm just going to preface this by saying that the 2010 remake of Nightmare on Elm Street is going to be excluded from this list. I know the vast majority of people actually hate that movie. Hate's a strong word. I don't hate it, I just don't like it. Completely and utterly unnecessary, but as bad as the film is, I still don't think it's one of the worst remakes ever made. And in Jackie Earle Haley's defence, I don't think anyone could top or come close to Robert Englund. But anyway, so yeah, the Nightmare on Elm Street 2010 remake is not going to be talked about on this list. Now I'm just also going to say that to me, the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, like the vast majority of horror franchises, it's had its highs and it's had its lows. Some of these films I absolutely love. Some of them I really don't care for. I think the problem I had was I started to lose interest in later sequels when Freddy Krueger, Robert Englund is a horror icon. You know, there's no denying that. He's cemented himself in that role. You know, he is Freddy Krueger. He's fantastic. And he clearly had a hell of a time, you know, playing this character. But it kind of got to the point where Freddy Krueger become a little too comedic for my liking, and it got to the point where Freddy Krueger was kind of becoming a bit of a cartoon character, and there wasn't really anything scary about Freddy Krueger anymore. But still, you know, even with the later installs, some of the later films, they're still fun. They're still fun movies. So just going to get the ball rolling now. And in bottom place, without a doubt, bottom of the barrel here, Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. I just think it's a joke of a film. It's I don't know. Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck are less cartoony than what Freddy Krueger is in this film. It's like Freddy Krueger in a Looney Tunes cartoon. It's clearly it's just played for laughs. You know, there's nothing really scary about this movie at all. You know, it was obviously released in '91, like 7 years after the original '84 film, and it was a big money grabbing franchise, and that at this point. Just yeah, there's really nothing about this film that I particularly like. But like with the next film on the list, what these films I feel did do well was they became a great showcase for practical effects. You know, there's no denying that this franchise is really innovative. You know, that there's a lot of really inventive kills that you won't really see elsewhere in any other kind of horror franchises. You know, the kills, Freddy steals the show. Freddy is clearly the star of the show, but with Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, it was just all too much of a joke for me. You know, this is the one, obviously, where he's playing the video game and he's bouncing the guy around in the video game. I'm like, oh my God. Just... It's clever, it's inventive, it's just way too cartoony for me. So yeah, I really don't like Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. Hands down the worst film of the entire franchise, in my opinion. So just above it, not a million miles away, but this is certainly better. And that's Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5, Dream Child. By this point in the franchise, I was really starting to lose interest, but obviously the franchise was successful; it was doing well. I really don't like the whole idea and concept of this movie. I really don't. But again, some clever deaths, some inventive kills, etc. Just the whole idea of him trying to, inside the mind of an unborn child, and just. Yeah, that little kid's creepy though, by the way. He was actually in Jurassic Park and a few other things that I'm kind of struggling to bring to mind. It was just the whole idea and concept of this film I just thought really was quite ridiculous. But again, some kind of notable moments, if you will. You know, the car, the guy, the bike, sorry, the guy on the bike, and the bike's kind of transforming. He's becoming kind of one with the bike. And I believe this is the one also where the woman was basically being kind of force fed, and that Bon Appetit bitch. Freddy Krueger churns out some great one-liners over the course of this franchise and stuff. I just kind of missed the scare factor. I just kind of missed Freddy Krueger being scary. So Nightmare on Elm Street, while I think it's better than Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare, I really don't care much for this film, and this is where I really started to lose interest with the franchise. But as I said, that said, it's always great to see Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger, just as horror movies. I was just kind of missing. I was missing the core, the roots of the original film. Now, okay, the next film on the list. There were two films actually jostling for this spot. But it is actually Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, Dream Master. Now, I don't mind this one. I feel like this film's got some merit. It has some notable moments. Again, as I said, great kind of showcase for great practical effects, actually. The 80s was just rife with so many great practical effects, be it sci-fi, horror. The moment, obviously, where she's transforming into a cockroach, it's fantastically done. And obviously Wanna Suck Face, the scene in the classroom, I think, a couple of, kill highlights in that. So I think the fourth film, it isn't bad. There's like a little nod to Jaws during the course of the film as well, where Freddy's gloves coming through the sand and that. And, there's a real kind of surrealistic moment as well, with the souls on the pizza, soul meatballs and that. I love soul food and all that. And, she ends up keep going back. Alice keeps going to the diner in kind of a Twilight Zone-esque moment, keeps repeating itself and that. It has its little moments in that I like. It's a shame that Patricia Arquette wasn't back on board, because I very much did prefer Patricia Arquette's portrayal of the character. Obviously, the role was recast, but good kind of seeing Kincaid and Joey, I believe his name is. Obviously, they're killed off quite early on in the film, but hey, I'm glad they survived part 3. Being brought back to life by a urinating dog. I just. Yeah. I think the fourth film's okay. I think it's okay. But yeah. So, well, the next movie on the list would have to be A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. Now, I'm not really the biggest fan of this movie, but the more I've watched it, the more I've come to appreciate it. I by no means love it, but I think it's okay and somewhat underrated. What I kind of liked in this movie, Freddy was dark. This is probably the darkest, aside from Wes Craven's New Nightmare. This is the darkest we've seen Freddy aside from the original movie. And obviously in this film, he's actually trying to come through the body of, his name is actually escaping me, the lead character in the movie. And this film has its moments. There's clearly a lot of, not to go too much off topic, there's huge homoerotic overtones in this film that it's really not subtle. Apparently Jack Shoulder, the director, had no idea that it was so kind of homoerotic, which I kind of find very hard to believe, because this film has a lot. But yeah, I mean, there's a very brutal death actually in this movie as well, where he comes through the body and he actually kills his friend who he's actually sharing the room with, and he brutally kills him, and Freddy's claws go through the door, and that it's a pretty barbaric moment. I really feel that guy's death. And of course, the canary going crazy and that, and but there's little moments in this film that I like. For example, where Freddy comes into the real world and he's like, "You're all my children now," at the pool party. That's a pretty cool moment. I like that. And again, great practical effects and that. This took a different approach. this took a very different approach. And I know that it's one that Wes Craven wasn't keen on. Wes Craven really didn't particularly like the film, which is why he came back on board as producer for the third movie, Dream Warriors, which he obviously wrote in that. But I kind of like the opening as well. On the school bus. I love the whole kind of surrealistic nature there. Freddie driving, the school bus, leading these kids to their impending doom in that. Very kind of symbolic in that, if you will. Even though I don't love Freddy's Revenge Part 2, it is one that I've come to like a little bit more with more viewings. But yeah, to me, it doesn't come anywhere close to the original. And I think, to be honest, it probably surprised a lot of people when it came out, as to how different it was. Instead of kind of in the dream world, he's actually trying to come into the real world via this boy. So it was quite a contrast. Now, the next movie on the list. Now, I'm pretty certain that this would actually make a lot of people's second spot. For me, it's in the third place, though, and I do really like this film. I think this is one of the best horror sequels of the 80s. And Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors. I think this film has quite a lot going for it. Clearly, at this point, Freddy was becoming, obviously, the star of the show, and this movie was kind of veering into a little more comedy, but it just has so many great set pieces to this film. I think the opening death, is horrible. Where he's actually, and again, very inventive, as a lot of the deaths in this franchise were, where he's being led to his death. He's basically like a marionette, a puppet. Obviously this film had the welcome to primetime bitch line, which is definitely one of my favourite lines in the entire franchise. There's actually a line I really do like in the fourth movie as well, actually. It's when Joey's killed in the waterbed. How about this for a wet dream? Great line. But yeah, welcome to primetime bitch. Jennifer, I believe her name is Jennifer. Jennifer's death. Great scene. And then there's, what a rush. The woman that's obviously, a recovering drug addict, and that little face off she has and them needles going to her arm. And this film has a lot of memorable moments. And, as I said, I think this is really when the franchise started to veer a little more towards comedy, but not too much. It kept to its roots of actual horror. And, I loved its surrealistic nature. I quite like the idea of it as well. These people actually being able to kind of, empower their own dreams and that, and be able to achieve this in their own dreams and actually face off against Freddy. I did quite like the idea for that. Patricia Arquette's very first movie, I believe. Lawrence Fishburne's in here as well. Even though Lawrence Fishburne had done things prior, this was certainly one of his earlier film roles. I believe his very first film was Apocalypse Now, released in 1979. Only 13 years old in that film as well. I think he lied about his age to actually get onto the movie. But Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, I think, is a sequel that pretty much does everything right. I like the idea for the film. It's great having Heather Langenkamp back. I like the sense of, as strange as it sounds, kind of claustrophobia, if you will. Now, I realise these characters, they venture into their dreams and that, but all of these people are in one location. They're in this one place. They're in this clinic. They're trying to be helped, etc. And it's great having Langenkamp. It's great having John Saxon back. Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, some great deaths, some great lines. I love the line. The line is actually escaping me at the moment. It's where Freddy's looking for something, and he actually cuts her head off. He cuts off the woman's mum's head. And the line is actually escaping me. But I actually love that moment. Robert Englund clearly was having just such a fun time playing this character. That's in third place for me. Now, I'll admit it was very close to getting second place. But second place for me is Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which actually came out 10 years after A Nightmare on Elm Street. I actually love this film. I feel this is the most divisive, though. This is the one, some people love it, some people really don't care for it. I think when it was released in '94, I mean, I think it's a great slice of postmodern horror. Wes Craven proving he could do postmodern a couple of years before Scream. What I love about this movie is just the inventive nature of it. I love the whole idea that basically the Nightmare on Elm Street films are films. Freddy's not real, but Freddy is actually, he's been given life and he's slowly coming into this world. And I like that whole kind of idea of it. And, you know, getting to see Rob Shea, Wes Craven, Robert Englund, Langenkamp all playing themselves. And the parallels that this movie makes to the original Nightmare on Elm Street is just great. You know, it pays, you know, it obviously relies on one's knowledge of the original film, etc. But it respects that original film. And Freddy back to being dark and scary. Now, I know there's people out there that love all the one-liners and all this and that by Freddy Krueger. I fully get that. I love Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger, but I liked seeing this Freddy. I liked seeing this kind of darker-edged Freddy. I found it kind of refreshing. And, you know, he does have lines. They're not, you know, not like overly comedic or anything like that. I like the line where obviously he sees Heather Lanka, he comes through the closet, which I think is kind of a great jump scare moment, and he's like, miss me? I just love that. And of course, you know, hey, Dylan, ever play Skin the Cat? I love that. I mean, yes, it's not as iconic or anything as Welcome to Primetime, bitch. But yeah, I love them little moments. And yeah, we obviously got the little boy here. His name is actually escaping me. Obviously, he was in Pet Sematary as an evil little kid. And I think he was even in Kindergarten Cop, in fact, the Arnold Schwarzenegger film just a few years before this. So yeah, Wes Craven's New Nightmare. I think maybe it was a little bit too meta for its own good, which really put some people off. The fact that it was meta, that it was essentially kind of deconstructing the franchise and the subgenre. But I actually love it for that fact. The fact that it's so different to all of the other films that's come before it. Technically, it's not a sequel. It's not a sequel, but to have Wes Craven directing it as well, you know, who directed the original, who gave us Freddy Krueger and that. So yeah, Wes Craven's New Nightmare to me is one of the more underrated horror films of the 90s. I think it's great. I know some people that really don't care for this film. You know, that's fair enough. But no, it's one that I love for the as I said, for the sheer uniqueness and inventiveness of it. You know, it kind of very much kind of plays along the lines of, as well, this movie, I think, makes some commentary about how horror affects oneself. You know, Heather Langenkamp has a stalker and her child is exposed to horror and he starts going through some... So I like some of the kind of commentary and stuff that this movie very kind of subtly makes. So yeah, so obviously I think everyone knows what number one's going to be. It's going to be Nightmare on Elm Street, released in '84. One of my favourite horror films of the '80s, possibly my favourite. I'm not sure. You know, this film really injected some originality into the slasher subgenre. At its core, it is a slasher film, but it's one that has a very obviously surrealistic, supernatural edge to it. It gave us Freddy Krueger. You know, it gave us some great moments, some great lines. This was Johnny Depp's first movie. You know, playing Glenn in one of the films, probably the film's most iconic, famous death, where he's actually pulled into the bed and the geyser of blood comes out. Hell of a moment, terrified the hell out of me as a young kid. You know, with A Nightmare on Elm Street, it's a scary concept. Somebody trying to kill you in your dreams. If you die in your dreams, you die in the real world. I love the film tagline, if Nancy doesn't wake up screaming, she won't wake up at all. So many great moments. I love the moment when Nancy's in the bath and she falls asleep and Freddy's hand is slowly coming up and then goes in and he attempts in, you know, drowning her. He's coming up towards her. Great moment. And obviously his first proper introduction, his arms extending and, no, God, this is God. Freddy was actually quite scary in this film. I mean, there's a certain goofiness to him, but it's not overtly, it's not OTT. Robert Englund just does a great job of being. I mean, I love the moment, no running in the hallways. Hey, Nancy, no running in the hallways. I love that moment as well. And what I like about the franchise really as a whole, but especially in this first film, is that whole surrealistic element of are they dreaming or aren't they? You think a character's awake and then they see something, and then you realise, no, damn, they're asleep. That moment of Tina's death is just, yeah, brutal. A hell of a death that really kind of sets the tone for this movie. And yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street, a great score as well, very well directed by Wes Craven. I think as well, considering its relatively low budget, I think the practical effects in this movie as well were actually quite good considering the budget. So come to Freddie. Another little moment that I love is when she picks up the telephone. I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy. And then you get the tongue lick from the telephone. Just so many awesome moments in this movie, and it's the whole kind of you're defenseless. As I said, the concept's really scary. You're powerless. The dream world is Freddy's realm. He owns that realm. And the whole idea for the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, I love. But the original film is hands down my favourite. But I appreciate the franchise as a whole, because it gave us Freddy Krueger and just the whole idea, just the whole concept of it, which, it's a concept that had been done before in various kind of television shows, etc. But it'd never been done as a mainstream horror film before. There's an episode of The Twilight Zone called Perchance to Dream, which I actually think is quite an underrated episode. It was a season 1 episode, and it's about a man who every time he dreams, he's dreaming of this woman because he has a weak heart condition, and this woman's actually trying to drive him to his death in his dreams. So it's very kind of Freddy Krueger-esque with this sultry seductress in his dreams and that, but it pushed this whole concept kind of into the mainstream, and it's one of the best horror films of the 80s in my opinion. It's one of the greatest slasher films of all time. Obviously it's not your straight out and out slasher film. This is, as I said, a slasher film that's very different, very unique. But yeah, so the original Nightmare on Elm Street. So anyway, thanks to everyone that listened. That's pretty much it for today. And if you've liked what you've heard, please feel free to subscribe to my channel, Talk and Stalk, and I'll be back again soon. Thank you.